Hey everyone, Kirai Kino here. Today we're going to be picking up where we left off, talking about Season 2 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and its Japanese source material. So Season 1 ended with a bunch of episodes adapted from custom-made action footage called Ju 2 by fans, shot by Toei, specifically for Power Rangers. So these episodes carry on into the first 13 episodes of Season 2, but what's immediately different right off the bat is higher production value. Ever since the first season's runaway success, it looks like they had a little more money to throw around on the earlier Season 2 episodes. So the three-part season premiere, The Mutiny, which takes place partially at an off-road race, actually looks like a pretty large event. On top of that, they were able to stop relying on Japanese footage for the villains and introduce a new, scarier successor to Rita Repulsa, her superior Lord Zed, who has gotten sick of her inability to successfully take over the world and banishes her back to space, taking over in her place as the Power Rangers' main antagonist. They also show a little more foresight this time around in dealing with the limitations of the Japanese footage. When Tommy's powers were brought back in late Season 1 as part of the Ju 2 footage, it was always acknowledged as a temporary measure, and as the Ju 2 footage gets closer and closer to running out, Tommy's powers fading becomes a recurring theme, and Lord Zed repeatedly targets Tommy specifically to try and drain his powers, which he eventually does lose. So clearly the writers knew that they'd eventually run out of Zyuranger footage, custom or otherwise, altogether pretty soon, and they'd have to find some way to transition into using footage from the series' successor, Gosei Sentai Dairanger. The thing is though, they did begin using aspects of Dairanger even before they ran out of the Ju 2 footage. During that season premiere, Lord Zed actually destroys the original mecha from Season 1, forcing them to be replaced with the Dairanger mecha, which would persist throughout Season 2, here renamed the Thunderzords, replacing the Dinozords. This was kind of the first indication of the sort of trouble Saban was going to run into adapting Dairanger and later Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger, while still continuing the original Power Rangers story and style from Season 1, including the same costumes. They didn't want to get rid of the costumes from Season 1, seeing as they'd just blown up and become extremely marketable in the US, and this wasn't a problem while they were still adapting Ju 2 footage. However, they'd still kind of made things harder for themselves by trying to introduce the Thunderzords early. First of all, they decided to abandon the Chinese mysticism theme of Dairanger and sort of westernize the fantasy creatures that the Thunderzords were supposed to represent. There wasn't really a way around the Red Dragon, which was clearly a Chinese dragon, so they just kept that, but they renamed all the others. Some of them worked, like the Shishi becoming a lion, and the Feng Huang, which is sometimes called a Chinese phoenix, renamed a firebird. But others were a lot less apt. The Qianma, which is a flying horse, became a unicorn despite not having a horn, while the Qilin, which did have a horn, was inexplicably referred to as a griffin, despite appearing distinctly horse-like, like the Qianma. It doesn't really make any sense. They also had to cheat on the color scheme a little bit because the core Dairanger team had a Green Ranger instead of a Black Ranger, but there was enough black in the Lion Thunderzord's color scheme for Zack to inherit it without it seeming too out of place. The real problem with this is, though, the Power Rangers got the Thunderzords while they were still working their way through Ju 2 monsters, which were filmed fighting the Dinozords, which means that the fight scenes involving the mecha and giant-sized monsters were cut together from two different sources, so the Thunderzords and monster could never appear in the same shot, since they were never actually filmed together. It's really noticeable, and it makes a lot of the early Thunderzord fights short and awkward, to say nothing of the shots where you can see that the monster was originally fighting the Dinozords. Eventually, though, they did run out of Ju 2 footage, so Tommy finally lost his powers and the show moved on to adapting Dairanger episodes instead of Zyuranger or Ju 2 episodes. Tommy was brought back and took over the position of team leader as the White Ranger, using the costume of Dairanger's 6th Ranger, which looked just similar enough to the Zyuranger costumes to kind of blend in. Unfortunately though, this left the show with the opposite problem that it had while working with the Zhu 2 footage and the Dairanger Zords. They wanted to keep the Zhu Ranger costumes still, but they couldn't really cheat on the human scale fights the way they could with the Zord fights. The human scale fights were a lot more varied in locale and choreography and depended much more on the Rangers and monsters actually appearing in the same shot together. On top of that, the team would now be incorporating costumes from 2 different Japanese Ranger teams, which there was simply no Japanese source footage for. At this point, since Saban was already having a lot of costumes shipped over from Japan to shoot new footage to kind of fill in the gaps in the American stories, they just started shooting all of the human-scale Ranger fights themselves. This is about where that increase in production values started to drop off, with the show's resources stretched a lot thinner, as Saban was now shooting almost all of a given episode themselves except for the giant scale fights. On top of that, the overall quality of the action scenes suffered quite a bit. Now, the Saban filmed action scenes had never quite been up to the standard of Toei's, but that was alright because it was almost all unmorphed. They had the excuse that they weren't at their full power or anything like that. It kind of worked. But now they were shooting basically all the human scale fights themselves without the benefit of Super Sentai's crew, which already had a couple decades of experience under their belt. Saban's crew just weren't the veterans that Toei's crew were, and so the decision not to use Toei's fight footage really hurt the show overall. On top of that, pretty bizarrely, in the rare case where they did use Dairanger footage of the White Ranger, the footage they chose used body language that was really strange coming from a high schooler, which was in fact because the original White Ranger in Dairanger was actually a 10-year-old kid scaled up to adult size when in costume. They tried to dub it over to kind of sell this behavior coming from someone who's 16, 17, something like that, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, it works! Alright! Woohoo!
So on top of all that, the showrunners also had to deal with the mid-season departure of 3 major cast members. Despite the first season's success, the cast were still making the same roughly fast food wages as they had been on season 1, which led Jason's actor Austin St. John, Trini's actress Tui Trang, and Zach's actor Walter Jones to leave the show. I've heard the conflict framed a couple of different ways. Either they wanted to unionize the show by making Power Rangers a SAG production or forming their own union, or they just went to him asking for higher wages, but regardless, instead of negotiating new terms, Saban decided to just conceal their absence until replacements could be found and their characters written out of the show. The first evidence of this is in episodes that were already shot by the time they left, but hadn't completed ADR. Meaning for these episodes, the morphed red, yellow, and black Rangers are voiced by sound-alikes of varying quality.
Alright, lip syncer! Time for the power of thunder!
I can't believe you fooled Goldar!
Okay, Rangers, warp out!
You have to do better than that if you want to beat us! You have to do better than that if you want to beat us!
Once you get to the episodes shot after their departure, suddenly Jason, Zach, and Trini are never around the other 3 anymore, with the remaining 3 meeting some new characters who've just moved into town, namely Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. The original Red, Yellow, and Black Rangers are relegated to body doubles or recycled footage, while these new characters meet and befriend and gain the trust of the remaining Rangers. Around the same time, we start hearing about an upcoming youth conference on world peace to be held in Switzerland, and eventually we learn that Jason, Zach, and Trini have been selected to represent the town of Angel Grove at this conference. They eventually leave for Switzerland, Rocky, Adam, and Aisha take their places on the team, and we never see and rarely hear from them again until Jason's eventual return as the Gold Ranger in the last part of Power Rangers Zeo. The new Rangers are poor replacements for their predecessors, and in a lot of ways they're kind of symptomatic of a general problem with the show's writing around this time. As the process of adapting the show became more challenging, the characterization in general began to slip a little bit. Some of it could be passed off as character growth, like Kimberly becoming a little bit less of a valley girl, and Billy talking more intelligibly with less technobabble, but the thing is, it was also kind of robbing these characters of their defining traits. And of course there's Tommy, which Tommy really never had that much of a personality besides just being kind of another Jason, but without his acting ability. and the new additions are from the start as kind of vague and indistinct as the original Rangers had been becoming. Rocky has a bit of an outgoing jock thing going on, and Adam's a bit more sensitive and soft-spoken, but these traits are pretty muted, and from the very beginning, Aisha's got really no personality beyond just being Kim's new best friend. The whole switch seems to have just really negatively affected morale on set. The sense of excitement from Season 1 is really lost in the last half of Season 2, and Billy's actor David Yost increasingly looks like he doesn't really want to be there. And considering the stories of the homophobic harassment he apparently suffered at the hands of the show's producers, I can kind of see why. The producers seem to realize that the new characters were a lot less compelling, and so the last part of Season 2 is filled with a lot of gimmicky multi-parters, including one where the Rangers are trapped in a children's book, and 2 different time travel stories in which we learn that the town of Angel Grove had apparently both been part of the British colonies and the Wild West. While these multi-parters are at least novel, they kind of feel like an attempt to wring as many episodes out of the Dairanger footage using the current adaptation scheme as possible. And even at 8 episodes less than Season 1, Season 2 really drags. The only other real thing of note about late Season 2 is Rita's comeback. Due to parents apparently complaining about Lord Zed being too frightening for their kids, she comes back near the end of Season 2 with a scheme to cause him to fall in love with her and marry her so that she can usurp his power. This plan also involves a makeover, which kind of covers for the fact that she's now played by a different, much younger actress. But her plan to take over never really goes anywhere, and she and Zed kind of eventually just form a kind of bickering married couple act. And while Rita's comeback would have been a great note to end Season 2 with, it happens with about 10 episodes to go. Just like Season 1, Season 2 ends with a pretty standard one-off episode, with Zed and Rita creating an evil double of Billy. Once again, the kind of ad hoc storytelling really sabotages the pacing of Season 2. Considering what a kind of hasty patchwork Season 2 of Power Rangers is, it probably isn't saying too much to say that Dairanger is a lot better, but seriously, Dairanger is excellent. It's honestly a much stronger show all around than Zyuranger was, and it's really a shame that more of it didn't make it into Power Rangers. I was initially hooked by the choreography, which stands head and shoulders above the other Sentai shows I'd seen at the time, to say nothing of the American fight footage. The series' Chinese theme meant that each Ranger fought using a different style of Kung Fu, including Dragon Fist, Hunga, Long Fist, Drunken Boxing, and Eagle Fist. This approach lends a unique elegance to the show's action scenes, improving on the already excellent fight choreography of its immediate predecessors, Jetman and Zyuranger. Dairanger is also an even clearer illustration of the different standards for kids shows in the US and Japan. There's a lot of stuff in Dairanger that would have never flown in Power Rangers, including whole recurring characters. There's Jin, who travels around assassinating prominent kung fu masters to refine his demon fist style, who develops a rivalry with the Red Ranger, Ryo. Ryo is nearly killed in his first fight with Jin and trains with a grotesque set of spring-based restraints in preparation for the next confrontation. Jin reappears in several more episodes, eventually developing a kind of respect for and even friendship with Ryo as a worthy adversary. But his only appearance in Power Rangers is in a transformed state as a Monster of the Week. There are also 3 incompetent monsters called the Three Stooges who repeatedly challenge the Dairangers to sports-based competitions. They're also cut out of Power Rangers almost entirely, probably because of their leader, Boss Kamikaze, who references Japanese motorcycle culture's appropriation of Imperial Japanese aesthetics. Only one of the Three Stooges, Company President Tombstone, makes a brief appearance in Power Rangers. Even some of the monsters of the week had to be sanitized, like one who got unsuspecting people drunk on intoxicating tofu and challenged the Yellow Ranger to a drinking contest. That aspect of the character is, of course, completely ignored in the American adaptation. The story in Dairanger is really compelling and complex as well, with each character getting at least one arc of their own. Ryo has the revelation of his father working with the villains, and later his rivalry with Jin. The Green Ranger, Daigo, has a doomed romance with Kujaku, the reincarnated Peacock Buddha. Shoji, the Blue Ranger, has a rivalry with the Three Stooges. Kazu, the Yellow Ranger, becomes friends with Kameo, through which we learn of his past as a runaway from the country, hidden behind a slick, cultured urban image. Rin, the Pink Ranger, takes in a child named Ko, not realizing that he's the White Ranger, while Ko discovers that he's the abandoned son of one of the villains and must reunite with his mother before his 10th birthday, if he's to prevent the evil blood in him from taking over. Towards the end, there are some kind of political power plays in the villains' camp. The Dairanger's Master Kaku, who originally defected from the villains' side, returns to try and bring a final end to their millennia-old conflict. The series ends with the villains returning after 50 years to challenge the new Dairangers, who are the grandchildren of the original Dairangers, posing the two as a kind of yin and yang-esque set of eternal opposing forces in a conflict that will go on forever, which kind of also provides a meta-commentary on the eternal renewal and reincarnation of the Super Sentai series. All in all, between the two of them, it's really not even close. I have to give it to Dairanger. The story's excellent, the choreography is amazing, the mecha look even better this season. It's all around just a really fantastic show. Whereas Season 2 was just held back too much by the constraints of how they tried to adapt the source material, as well as having to deal with upheavals behind the scenes. The whole thing's just too incoherent to really hold a candle to Dairanger. It's really no contest in the end. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. As before, my Patreon should be down at the bottom of the page in the description, and you can check out my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and so on to find out about when the next video is coming up, the progress on that. And yeah, I'll see you next time to talk about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie and Season 3, as well as its source material, Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger. I'll see you guys next time.